Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Miller, Official Secretary to the Governor of New South Wales, and it's my pleasure to be the Master of Ceremonies for this afternoon's investiture. I should have also said welcome to also our friends and family at home who are watching this ceremony online. In a moment, I'll announce the entrance of Her Excellency the Governor, and I'll ask you to rise for that, and after that, we'll just remain standing for the National Anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, Her Excellency the Honourable Margaret Beazley, Governor of New South Wales. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated.
Bujuri Gamarua, Dian Babana Gadarada, Gadigal Nagara. We are, of course, on the beautiful lands of the Gadigal, and in our tradition here at Government House, we acknowledge them as the traditional owners, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and to First Nations people across this wonderful state of ours. In about the middle of the 13th century, St. Anthony of Padua is reputed to have said, "Actions speak louder than words." Now, I'm a lawyer, and I think I could pitch both sides of an argument as to whether that was right or not. But words are certainly important. I mean, words shape the way we think. That's why we place so much emphasis on literacy. But literacy, of course, is much more about the written word. And with that emphasis, I think for probably too long, we've missed out on understanding the beauty of Indigenous languages. And I wonder, just having sung the national anthem, which, depending upon which version of history you like, has been our national anthem since 1974 or 1984, and it's quite political if you start putting that into context, but it's been a fairly short time. But I do wonder if you've ever thought how the Sydney Indigenous locals would sing the national anthem, but sing it probably back then and certainly now. It's very interesting. So personally, I love our anthem. I think it speaks about us as a people as we want to think about ourselves. We are a people, we are one and free. We live in a beautiful country, in Gadigal language, Eora Butcheri. We are good people. And aren't we here today with not only one room of good people, but 2 rooms of good people? And that phrase, with golden soil and wealth for toil, slightly convoluted because it was written by a Scotsman, but we'll leave that to one side for the moment. In the Indigenous language, the local Sydney language, that is translated as Yaragal Bamal Yarabuni. Yellow earth, don't tire yourself. How is that as a beautiful statement of ecology and conservation, and a lesson we should all learn. And then they go on and they speak about the land of many sunrises. Marimura, Guing. Marimura, Guing. Such a beautiful conception of what happens when the sun rises. And then, of course, what happens at the other end of the day. We have a red setting sun. These are the things of great beauty around our country. Tiara, Marama, Going. And I think if you wake up early enough, and I'm sure you're not in bed at the time of our setting suns, this is the land we live in. And speaking about language and speaking about words, I also wonder when was the last time you used the word, let alone thought about the word, chivalry? Well, it's at this point that action and words come together, because we are here to celebrate those who are to be invested into the Order of Australia. And the Order of Australia is an order of chivalry. It was established in 1975 under the auspices of the then Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. He announced it on Australia Day, 1975, and it officially came into existence on the 14th of February of that year, when Her Majesty signed letters patent establishing this wonderful system of Australian honours. It's a system which recognises those who have excelled, those who have achieved, those who have done something extraordinary in our community, in the professions, in business, in academia, in all those tireless hours in community service, in the Defence Forces and in emergency services, who've engaged in brave conduct. So again, we're thinking about who we are as a people, a wonderful people of good people, Iora Bujari. I think one thing that has really remained with us from those days of the 1970s, when Advance Australia Fair became our national anthem, when this system of national honours was recognised. It's what they represent. And in almost an ironic twist, this was summed up not by Gough Whitlam himself, but by Tony Abbott. He was Prime Minister in 2014 when Gough Whitlam died at the age of 98. And, coming from such opposite sides of the political spectrum, he nonetheless said of Gough Whitlam, he said, in his 3 years as Prime Minister of our country, it was his vision which changed public life in a way that still echoes. He was a giant of his time. And as I read the citations for those who are recipients of Australian honours, I don't have to think all that hard to realise that we are speaking of individuals who are giants in their way, in their time, and in their place. And they are giants with a vision. They are a vision of doing something when they see something is to be done. And the thing that you'll realise that binds the individual recipients from such a wide range of endeavours, as you will hear shortly, is what they've given to the community. They've given strength to the community. They've given us so much joy in so many ways. They've supported the community in extraordinary ways. Can I just say, it is such a privilege to be able to be here today in my role as Governor to invest the extraordinary people in their Order of Australia. Thank you.
Should it please Your Excellency, To be invested with the insignia of an Officer of the Order of Australia within the General Division, Professor Rodney Graham Sims. Professor Sims has been the Chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission since 2011. He is the Vice Chair of the International Competition Network Steering Committee. Former Director of Ingeus London, Professor Sims is a former Director of Port Jackson Partners. He's also been the former Chairman of both Sustainable Energy Limited in Papua New Guinea and Infraco Asia in Singapore. He is the former Chair of both the New South Wales State Rail Authority and the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal of New South Wales. A former Commissioner of the National Competition Council, Professor Sims also served as Economic Advisor to Prime Minister Bob Hawke. He is the former Secretary of both the Commonwealth Department of Transport and Communications and the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. For distinguished service to public administration in economic policy and regulatory roles, Professor Sims. To be invested with the insignia as a member of the Order of Australia within the General Division, Miss Catherine Ann Cox. Miss Cox is co-host of the Super Netball Show on Channel 9. She is an ambassador of Rock Up Netball, Netfest and Court in the Bay. Miss Cox played in more than 250 National League matches in the Commonwealth Bank Trophy and ANZ Championships. Ambassador and coach at Macquarie Sports Netball Clinics, Miss Cox is a former head coach of the Hills District Netball Association. Former Vice Captain of the Australian Diamonds, Miss Cox received the Spirit Award from Melbourne Vixens and was Captain of West Coast Fever and the New South Wales Swift, who named her Player of the Year and 3 times the QBE Most Valued Player. She was Player of the Year twice each for the Swifts and for the Perth Orioles. Miss Cox was named Netball Australia's Australian Player of the Year and Player of the Year by the Australian Netball Players Association and the ANZ Championship. She won the Women in Sports Service Award to Sport and was inducted into the New South Wales Hall of Champions. For significant service to netball as a player and as a coach, Miss Cox. Professor Juan van Neuen. Professor Neuen is the Director of the University of Technology Sydney's Centre for Health Technologies and a Professor of Predictive Medicine. He is the Principal Investigator of the Garvan Institute of Medical Research's Dubbo Osteoporosis and Epidemiology Study, and for 2 decades was Head of the Genetic and Epidemiology of Osteoporosis Laboratory. He is the principal inventor of the Garvan Fracture Risk Calculator. He is a distinguished professor at the Ton Doc Tan University of Vietnam, the Committee of Appointment and Promotion Chair, and the founding head of the Bone and Muscle Research Laboratory at that institution. He is an adjunct professor of epidemiology and biostatistics at the University of Notre Dame's Sydney School of Medicine and professor of Epidemiology at the University of New South Wales School of Population Health. Author of 12 books and over 300 scientific papers, he is a Professor Honoris Causa of the Hanoi University of Pharmacy and received from the Vietnam Minister for Foreign Affairs a Medal of Recognition, and from the Osteoporosis Society of Vietnam a Medal of Lifetime Achievement and Excellence. For significant service to medical research, to osteoporosis and fracture prevention, and to tertiary education, Professor Neuen. Mr. Nicholas Ernest Parkhill. Mr. Parkhill is the CEO of Acon Health and was founder of Pride in Sport, Pride in Health and Wellbeing, and Pride in Diversity. He is the former Associate Director Operations of New South Wales Health's Mental Health and Drug and Alcohol Office and has worked in many state roles related to drug and alcohol policy. He is the former Chair of the New South Wales Ministerial Suicide Prevention Advisory Committee and the Metropolitan Gay Men's HIV Prevention Interagency. Former Board and Regional Advisory Group member of the Asia Pacific Coalition on Male Sexual Health and former Board member of the Australian Federation of AIDS Organisations. Mr. Parkhill has received the Australian Human Rights Commission Community Award for Organisations and a New South Wales Health Innovation Award for Local Solutions. He has attended the Harvard Kennedy School of Government in the Strategic Management for Leaders for Non-Government Organisation and the Australian Institute of Company Directors Governance Foundations for Not-for-Profit Directors. For significant service to community health, particularly to people living with HIV/AIDS and to healthcare delivery, Mr. Parkhill. The Honourable Justice Michael John Slattery. Justice Slattery is a life member of the New South Wales Bar Association and a trustee of the Indigenous Barristers Trust, the Mum Shirl Fund. He has served the New South Wales Bar Association as President from 2005 to 2007, Senior Vice President, Secretary and Chair of the Equal Opportunity Committee. A barrister for 44 years and a Queen's Counsel for 30 years, he is the former Chair of the Legal Profession Admission Board and has been a Justice of the Supreme Court of New South Wales since 2009. He is also the former Director of the Law Council of Australia, and Justice Slattery was Co-Chair of the International Bar Association's Professional Ethics Committee. Justice Slattery has served as a legal officer in the Royal Australian Navy Reserve since 1990. He was appointed as the Deputy Judge Advocate General Navy in 2010 and was Judge Advocate General of the Australian Defence Force from 2014 to 2021. Has previously been appointed member of the Order of Australia within the Military Division for his exceptional service to military law. For his significant service to the law, to the judiciary and to professional legal associations, the Honourable Justice Slattery. The Honourable Gary Allen Watts. Recently retired, Mr Watts has been a Justice at the Family Court of Australia since 2005. He's a former Justice of the Appeal Division and a former member of the Finance, Policy Advisory, Law Reform and the Harmonisation of Rules Committees. Mr Watts is a former Circuit Judge in Far North Queensland and Case Management Judge in Sydney. He is the former Chair of the Rules Committee, former Convener of the Joint Courts Data Analysis Committee and co-author of the report on Protocol for the Division of Work between the Family Court of Australia and the Federal Circuit Court. Former Chair of the Law Council of Australia's Family Law Section, Justice Watts was a guest lecturer in arbitration at the University of New South Wales and in family law at the University of Sydney. He has been a judicial member of the Law Society of New South Wales and former President of the Parramatta and District Law Society. For significant service to the law and to the judiciary, particularly to the Family Court of Australia, the Honourable Gary Watts. To be presented with the Conspicuous Service Cross, Squadron Leader Helen Beachley, Royal Australian Air Force. Squadron Leader Beachley's extraordinary energy and exceptional skills were crucial to the transitioning the old professional military education and training 2009 program and in the development and implementation of a new scheme known as Program Wirraway. The sheer complexity of this undertaking cannot be understated. It required the concerted application of skill and dedication for the successful transition to meet an ambitious time frame. Squadron Leader Beachley's superb contribution was inspirational and enhanced the Royal Australian Air Force's reputation as a professional, agile learning organisation. For outstanding achievement in professional military education, training, development and implementation for the Royal Australian Air Force, Squadron Leader Beachley. To be presented with the Medal of the Order of Australia within the General Division, Mrs. Margaret Bell. Mrs. Bell was Administrative Assistant at Macarthur Preschool for over 36 years. A life member of the Falcons Soccer Club, she has been a committee member for 3 decades and Honorary Secretary for 2 decades. A member of the Camden RSL, she is a former organiser at the Anzac Day Parade. A Justice of the Peace, Mrs. Bell is a member of the Camden RSL Bowling Club and former representative of the Camden for Children group. For her work, she has been recognised with the Football Federation of Australia's Volunteer Service Award and named in 2016 by New South Wales Government as Woman of the Year for the Camden region. For service to the community of Camden, Mrs. Bell. Mrs. K Christine Bolton. Former school teacher in Victoria, for 2 decades, Mrs. Bolton has been the president of the Fingal Head Coast Care, which has been named New South Wales champion in the Shawgrow Coast Care Awards. She has volunteered in various roles for the Fingal Head Community Association and for the Fingal Head Public School. She helped establish the Bush Tucker Garden and provides practical teaching events for students in June care and received an Outstanding Contribution Award for those efforts. Mrs. Bolton is a Landcare Australia Tweed June Care Coordinating Committee member and has organised many Clean Up Australia Days and Graffiti Off Days. She is assistant to the Tweed Byron Local Aboriginal Land Council for the Fingal Peninsula Natural Environment. Mrs. Bolton is an inductee to the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries Hidden Treasure Roll of Honour. For service to land care management, Mrs. Bolton. Dr. Peter Daniel Broad. Dr. Broad is the co-director of the General Medicine Department at the Manning Base Hospital and has been a respiratory physician and general physician at the hospital since 1987. Dr. Broad is a conjoint lecturer at the University of Newcastle and a member of the Medical Advisory Committee at the Mayo Private Hospital in Taree. He is also a physician at the Forster Private Hospital. Dr. Broad is a Fellow of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians and sponsor of the biannual Manning Art Prize of the Friends of the Manning Regional Art Gallery. Dr. Broad has been a member of the Manning Valley Race Club for 35 years, as a former member of both the Taree Squash and Golf Clubs. For service to medicine as a physician, Dr. Broad. Mr. Charles Maxwell Cornwall. Mr. Cornwall has been a family therapist and psychologist at Max Cornwall and Associates for nearly 4 decades. Honorary Life Member of the Australian Association of Family Therapy, Mr. Cornwall was the founding member of the Family Therapy Association of New South Wales and received the Australian New Zealand Journal of Family Therapy Award and he was for some time the editor of that journal. A member of the Australian Association of Social Workers, he was editor of Australian Social Work. A member for over 4 decades of the Australian Psychology Society, Mr Cornwell is a member of the Child, Adolescent and Family Psychology Interest Group. Co-founder of the Family Therapy Institute of Australia, he is former chair and is a life member and honorary clinical member of the Victorian Association of Family Therapists. For service to the community as a psychologist and social worker, Mr Cornwell. Ms Susan Catherine Day. Ms Day has been Health Manager at Royal North Shore Hospital for 2 decades and organises its Festival of Music. Ms Day is the co-founder of Wise Kids World. She's the former President and Secretary of both the Epping Boys High School and the Beecroft Public School Parents and Citizens Associations. She's a fundraiser for the Mary MacKillop Foundation, also for Room to Read, 100% Hope, and the Yagelli School in Papua New Guinea. Ms Day is a former secretary of the Beecroft Soccer Club and former president of the Beecroft Cheltenham Scout Group. Ms Day has received the New South Wales Community Service Award, the New South Wales Public Schools Gordon Network Award, and was joint winner of the Senior Champion of the Year of the Innate Power of Women Forum at the Innate Power of Women Forum. For service to the community through a range of organisations, Ms Day. Mr Ian Robert Frame. Mr Frame is the Director of Professional Marketing Services, life member and founding CEO of the Australian Window Association. He was also a founding member and CEO of the Building Products Innovation Council. He is a former Executive Officer of the Gypsum Board Manufacturers of Australasia. For Knox Grammar School, Mr Frame served twice as Secretary for the Old Knox Grammarians Association and is President of the Senior Knoxonians Group. Life member of the Knox Rugby Club, who is a former team manager for more than 2 decades. Mr Frame is an advisor and Special Projects Director for the club. He was the leader of the second Taramo Cub Pack for Scouts New South Wales. Mr Frame received the New South Wales Suburban Rugby Union's Peter Kelly Medal, Ku-ring-gai Council's Outstanding Community Service Award, and was joint winner of Rugby Australia HSBC Volunteer of the Year. For service to the community through a range of organisations, Mr Frame. Ms Charmian Gadd. Ms Gadd is a former professional violinist and performed in the United States and Europe for over 23 years before returning to Australia. A lifetime member of Musica Viva Australia, she was founding member of the Trio Concertante and the Macquarie Trio. Miss Gadd is patron of the Central Coast Conservatorium of Music and former artistic director of the Crossroads Chamber Music Festival. She's a patron of the Symphony Central Coast, an honorary artistic director and resident tutor of the Australian String Academy. She's former artistic director of the Australian Festival of Chamber Music. Miss Gadd was former head of strings at both the Sydney Conservatorium and the Canberra School of Music. She's former associate professor at Pittsburgh's University and Bellingham's Western Washington University, and former head of the Australian Institute of Music's Selective Performance Program. For service to music, Miss Gadd. Mrs. Norma Jean Gallagher. The co-owner, financial manager of the Dunedoo Rural Hardware, which has been, Miss Norma Jean Gallagher and Mr. Ronald Gallagher, I beg your pardon. Co-owner and financial manager of Dunedoo Rural Hardware, which has been awarded the New South Wales ACT Store of the Year, Mrs. Gallagher is a life member and treasurer of the Dunedoo Lions Club and has been a member of that club since 1996. She organises the seniors' luncheons for the annual Seniors Week and was coordinator for distributing goods and funds to people affected by the bushfires, and is treasurer for the annual fundraising event, also for Art Unlimited. She supports the Christmas Carnival as a Melbourne Jones Fellow of Lions Club International. A supporter of the Dunedoo Retirement Committee, Mrs. Gallagher is a supporter and fundraiser for Karkama House and the Bavarian Beer Festival. I'd like to attend that one time, Mrs. Gallagher. She is a life member and former secretary and treasurer of the Dunedoo Annual Amateur Swimming Club. Mr. Gallagher is also the co-owner and financial manager of the Dunedoo Rural Hardware, which, as I said, has been awarded the New South Wales ACT Store of the Year. He's a life member and former president, team captain and player for the Dunedoo Rugby League Football Club. Mr. Gallagher is a former president and coach of the Dunedoo Junior Rugby League and Netball Club, and former president and life member of the Dunedoo Amateur Swimming Club. New South Wales Volunteer of the Year senior winner for the Orana region, Mr. Gallagher is a Dunedoo Retirement Village Committee member and was co-host of a sports program on the Three Rivers Dunedoo Community Radio. For service to the community of Dunedoo, Mr. and Mrs. Gallagher. Mr. Matthew Peter Hansen. Owner of Matt Hansen Real Estate, Mr. Hansen is the founder and president of the OzFish Inland Waterways chapter. He's the founder and president of the Burrendong Classic Fishing Competition and co-founder of the River Repair Bus Initiative. Mr. Hansen is the New South Wales representative for recreational fishing on the Ministerial Advisory Council, as a member of Recreational Fishing New South Wales Advisory Committee. He's a regional and national fishing columnist for numerous publications. Mr. Hansen has been named Australian Fishing Volunteer of the Year and received the Premier's Award for Community Service. His WA Regional Council's Outstanding Community Service Award, the New South Wales Keeper Australia Beautiful Council Award, and the Australian National Fishing Conference Fish Habitat Hero Award. For service to recreational fishing and to conservation, Mr. Hansen. Mrs. Pamela Jill Hodgson, former farming manager of Conjura Hills, Burwa, and a teacher of secondary science. Mrs. Hodgson has been active in the Anglican Church in the Diocese of Campbell and Goulburn for more than 5 decades. She's lay canon of St Saviour's Cathedral, Goulburn, as a member of St John's Church, Burwa Parish Council for more than 25 years. Mrs. Hodgson is a former president of the Rotary Club Grenfell and is a Paul Harris Fellow of Rotary. Honorary Life Member and patron of the Brewer Show Society, she's the magazine editor of the Grenfell Clark Club. For Better Hearing Australia, she organised hearing loss management seminars in Grenfell and Cowra, and she is a Cochlear Awareness Network volunteer. She is an author and has received the University of Sydney Women's College Alumni Community Award. For service to the communities of Burwa and Grenfell, Mrs. Hodgson. Professor Elizabeth Ann McCusker. Professor McCusker is a clinical associate professor at the Westmead Clinical School, and for 15 years was the senior staff specialist in Westmead Hospital's neurology department. She's a clinical associate professor at Western Sydney University, and she's the author of more than 70 academic papers. A life member of the Australian Huntington's Disease Association New South Wales branch, Professor McCusker is a former clinical neurologist. A member of the Royal Australasian College of Physicians since 1978 and now a life member of the organisation, Professor McCusker is the former Secretary General of the World Federation of Neurology's Research Group on Huntington's Disease. Professor McCusker is a Fellow of the American Academy of Neurology. She has won a University of Rochester Alumni Award, and has been named a Woman of the West by the Western Sydney University. For service to medicine as a neurologist, particularly in the field of Huntington's disease, Professor McCusker. Mr. Robert Paul McFarlane. A member of the Returned and Services League of Australia Grafton sub-branch for over 4 decades, Mr. McFarlane is currently the Vice President of the sub-branch. He is also Vice President and a life member of the Clarence Valley Vietnam Veterans Association. Treasurer of the Legacy Club of Grafton, Mr. McFarlane has also served that organisation as President and Vice President. He's a volunteer for the Ruthga Lodge Ulmarra United Protestant Association of New South Wales and is President of the Ruthga Lodge Auxiliary. Mr. McFarlane is President of the Grafton Meals on Wheels and has volunteered for the Westpac Helicopter Rescue Service for more than 2 decades and is patron of the Returned and Services League of Australia Ulmarra sub-branch. For service to the community of Grafton, Mr. McFarlane. Mr. Jeffrey Lynn Minette. Life member and treasurer of Lifetime Connect, Mr. Minette is also a life member of the Mary Bolton Pioneer Cottage and Museum, where he is the research officer and has been a former president and vice president for that organisation. He's former deputy chair of the Nambucca River Cooperative Society. Justice of the Peace, Mr. Minette is the honorary auditor of a range of organisations, including the Maxwell and District Town Band, the Kempsey Macleay CWA, the Sturts Point's Men's Shed, to the Maxwell and District Hospital Auxiliary. He has written various publications on the history of the Nambucca Valley, including the Pioneer Register Nambucca Valley. His awards include the New South Wales Seniors Festival Local Achievement Award, Australia Day Award for Service to the Community, and a Lions Club Maxwell Certificate of Appreciation. For service to the community of the Nambucca Valley, Mr. Minette. Mrs. Loretta Morton. Mrs. Morton is the director of the Newcastle Art Gallery and has previously served as the Manager and Exhibitions Coordinator. She was the Interim Director of the Cultural Facilities for the Newcastle City Council. An artist for 2 decades, Mrs Morton is an arts industry mentor, a Create New South Wales peer panellist, and a Museums and Galleries New South Wales peer panellist. She's a member of the Protection of Australasian Cultural Assets Committee and participated in the Oxford Cultural Leaders Program at the University of Oxford. Mrs Morton is a member of the Australian Museums and Gallery Association, the Regional Public Galleries Association of New South Wales, and the Newcastle Art Gallery Foundation. She was listed as 26th on the Art Life Power Trip Most Influential People in the Australian Art World in 2020. For service to museums and to the gallery sector, Mrs Morton. Mr Mark Ray. Mr Mark Ray is the current musical director of the Fire and Rescue New South Wales Band. He's been a member of the band for over 4 decades and has been appointed a life member of the band. He's also a committee member and president of the Academy Guards Drill Marching Team. Mr Ray is also a member of the Hurstville Salvation Army Band. For service to music through marching and brass bands, Mr Ray. The late Mr David Timms. Mr Timms was a geological consultant for many years, the founder and director of Golden Cross Resources and exploration manager for Cypress Gold Australia. He was South Pacific Region Manager for Amoco Minerals Australia and former director of Tri-Origin Australia. He was a committee member for the Sydney Mineral Exploration Discussion Group for 34 years and won its Lifetime Achievement Medal. Mr Timms was a Fellow of the Australian Institute of Geoscientists and a committee member of that institute. He was a member of the Australian Institute of Mining and Metallurgy for 26 years and was also a member of the Professional Engineers in Ontario. He won the National Mining Awards Lifetime Explorer Award in 2017. For service to the minerals industry, the late Mr David Timms, whose award today was received by his son, Mr Darvin Timms. To be presented with the Medal of the Order of Australia within the Military Division, Warrant Officer Chad Bullman, Royal Australian Navy. One of Bolton's outstanding achievements in the field of clearance diving have been characterised by exceptional leadership and technical mastery. While encouraging professional excellence and esprit de corps amongst the Navy diving community, he has also instilled a desire to seek better or innovative ways to improve operational capability, which will enhance long-term effects. His legacy as a cohort of clearance divers encouraged to apply their intellect as well as their physical capabilities to operational challenges. For meritorious performance of duty in the fields of maritime explosive ordnance disposal and clearance diving, Warrant Officer Buhlmann. To be presented with the Medal of the Order of Australia as an honorary recipient within the General Division, Mrs. Sandra Trimmingham. Mrs. Trimmingham was the founder of the Family Drug Support Program in 1997 and has also been a volunteer manager and support line coordinator since that time. Family Drug Support aims to assist families throughout Australia to deal with drug issues in a way that strengthens relationships and achieves positive outcomes. Mrs. Trimmingham has worked closely with the Centre for Volunteering for over 20 years to support volunteers in this field. For service to the community through alcohol and drug use prevention groups, Mrs. Trimmingham. To receive the Commendation for Brave Conduct, Mr. Peter John Crane and Mr. Alexander Watkis. On the afternoon of the 11th of March 2015 at Byron Bay, a swimmer got into difficulties in strong surf conditions and signalled for help. Skies had become dark and it had started to rain. People on the beach noticed the struggling man, who is now about 130 metres from the shore. Utilising a surfboard and boogie board, Mr. Crane and Mr. Watkis entered the choppy water, making their way out beyond the rough surf zone to the swimmer, who was now having cramps in both legs. On reaching him, he was able to grab onto one of the boards. A third man, a police officer, swam to the group and assisted the swimmer onto the surfboard and began to head towards the shore. Mr. Crane and Mr. Watkis, sharing the boogie board, also began making their way back through the rough swell. A surf lifesaver on a jet ski arrived and took the fatigued swimmer back to the shore. The lifesaver then made 2 trips out to bring in Mr. Watkis and the police officer, while Mr. Crane paddled back to the shore on the boogie board. For their actions, Mr. Crane and Mr. Watkis are commended for brave conduct. Mr. Crane. Mr. Watkis. Your Excellency, that concludes this afternoon's investiture.
We've just heard just snippets of the life of an extraordinary number of people. If we think of the Bravery Award, for example, bravery happens just like that. But it happens like that because those who are prepared to be brave, to save a life, to put their own life at risk, do so because there's something that's in their character that is built up over many, many years, just as there is something in the character of all our recipients which has enabled them to do what they have done over so many years. And I think perhaps one way to sum it up is that we recognise the recipients of the awards today from their citations. That's the recognition we give them, but it is their actions that we honour. Can I say thank you again? And can I also say thank you for deepening our understanding of what our community is and indeed what community means. Thank you so much. There's a lot of people in the front of the room. And I think everybody in the back of the room will tell me, as we have a discussion afterwards, that if it wasn't for the people in the front of the room, they would not have been able to have achieved, would not have been able to have done what they've done, to have contributed to their organisations, to the community in ways that helps all of us, if it wasn't for their own personal support group, their family, their friends, those around them, whether it be their peers at work, perhaps a mentor who started them on their journey. So can I say to everybody here in the front of the room also, a very deep thank you. You too are the wonderful people of our country. Congratulations. So on a day of such national pride, and it is a day of national pride because these are national awards, one has to do something about it. And the only way, I think, to properly acknowledge days of national pride is to have a party. But having said that, we're going to have a party which celebrates not everything that's good about Australia. We're going to have a party that celebrates everything good about New South Wales. Because in here at Government House, we only have a party by using New South Wales produce. And that's not hard because New South Wales produce, it just happens to be the best in Australia, so we don't have to go very far looking for it. But we do it also to acknowledge that as a community, we should support those around us, including the businesses around us, and that's what we like to do at Government House Sydney, is to produce, to honour and utilise the local producers so that they too can have satisfactory businesses, profitable businesses, and we like to bring consciousness to it so that next time you go and buy your strawberries, you can just check the label and make sure they are from New South Wales. But you will enjoy it. Not the strawberries today, but what will we give you? I think the sandwiches are still on the menu, are they not, Official Secretary? Good. And the calzones? The calzones, yes, ma'am. They're wonderful. The calzones are just wonderful. They're a butternut pumpkin and spinach calzone. It's a beautiful pastry. And like I usually say, it's not a pies and peas party. So when you see the sort of sauce on top, it's not tomato sauce. It is the most exquisite tomato relish, which you'll just love. I still like the smoked rainbow trout blinis, finished off with just a little creme fraiche, truffled creme fraiche, And there's a little finger lime, just to sort of give it a bit of zest, and to say nothing of the rainbow trout caviar. Just beautiful. And I suspect that there are those in this room who once thought, but they'll never think again, that caviar was all about fish. Because I can assure you, by the time you get through the savoury menu and you move into the dolce, the sweet menu, you'll find a passion fruit curd tartlet, which will have a little candied walnut, just to give it that crispness. And then it will be finished off with honey caviar. How is that? Little pearls sitting on top. And what is particularly special about that, those little pearls are made from Rebecca honey. Why is that significant? Because the name Rebecca comes from my ancestor, born in the first government house. I'm sure a few of you here have got younger brothers. Took my younger brother to say to me, it only took us 200 years to come back. But she was born in the first government house, and so we acknowledge her by calling government house honey Rebecca honey. As I said, the honey is here from government house. The best honey that you'll find. But can I just say, next time you go looking for honey, make sure it's your local market honey. Much better than Manuka, and a lot cheaper. And by doing it, we support everything wonderful about New South Wales, including our wonderful recipients today. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now bid farewell to our online audience, and could I ask you to stand as Her Excellency and Mr. Wilson depart the ballroom, and then for you to join them for refreshments.